Welcome to Reducing the Harm of Alcohol Use. This is a web presentation that is brought to you by the Northeast Caribbean Addiction Technology Transfer Center. My name is Diane Padilla, and I will spend the next little while with you. So I wanted to go through and just quickly kind of review who we are funded by, which is SAMHSA. We are SAMHSA's response to workforce support for anybody in the addiction prevention and mental health fields, and also ancillary partners. We provide a lot of we provide free trainings. They're evidence-based practices. So this is skills building opportunities. There's also the latest information. Sometimes it's off statistics or what we're seeing in the numbers. And anytime I present that, I always ask everyone to kind of see if you see your communities in there. And so we're funded by SAMHSA, so we can provide you enough of the information and the continuing education credits so you can keep your license and credentials and keep doing all that great work that you folks are doing. And so let me move on from here. So we have these language matters slides, and this is always it's always underscoring everything that gets presented in from our organization. We always think about how language can either connect with people or push them away. And because over the years, stigma has been identified very consistently as one of the things that keeps people from accessing care or services they would benefit from, because of stigma, because of fear of being judged, and so much more, we try to consider what things we can do within our capacity. So as individual providers, we can consider, enhancing or evolving our dialogue, especially if we've been here a minute, because there's some of the things that we've learned in the past, some of the conditions, some of the disorders that we work with, and some of the practices that we've learned, it has evolved. And so we're going to continue going forward that way. So at the end of this, the time we're here together on the East Coast, we're at 10 a.m. till 12 p.m. And so wherever you are in the States, we're here for 2 hours. So I will stop for a few minutes before, just in time for you to be able to scan a code or click on a link that my partner Clive Frederick he's behind the scenes, he'll put that in the chat box. We'll ask you to go through that for, it takes about maybe 90 seconds, just a handful of questions. That, along with your full name in the chat box, helps us correlate it with your registration link, which is kind of how we make sure that you're not only just on the attendance list, but that you're actually present here. So we always encourage that. We also that you be visibly present, because helping us make sure that you're here is part of how we can justify sending you those certificates. Certificates will be given with a copy of the slides within a day or a week or so, and then it'll provide you 2 hours of KSAC, CPP, and CPS credentialing. And there is reciprocity across the states in terms of addiction counselor, continuing education credits. I already said a mouthful. So one of the things I want to, let me come out of here. One of the things I want to do is, because it's a short period of time, one of the goals, one of the intentions behind this particular presentation is to kind of maybe reignite our awareness, increase our awareness, but reignite our energy around alcohol. For many of us, we know that no matter how many overdoses we've had to deal with, or how many challenges it's been to the field, alcohol has been a consistent concern and issue for a lot of the folks we work with, we provide services to. And this very limited time, what I'm going to do is cover some things that you can add to, because you have a lot of experience, you have a lot of expertise. And one of the best things about you folks is when I do a training with you folks are always giving each other more information and more resources in the chat, which is absolutely fantastic. We're not always aware that certain practices that our peers do in the same line of work may be something applicable in our line of work, in our capacity. So that would be great if we can continue to do that. And so that has been the habit with all our web training. So that's nice. Much of the alcohol research, some of it, a good source to go to is the National Institute on Alcohol Abuse and Alcoholism, and much of the data that comes comes from there. That's a good resource. It's not the only one, but it's a good resource. And so, but that's my first go-to place. And in terms of things like, I do a lot of screening brief intervention for the treatment work, as for when it comes to alcohol as one of those substances that people might be using at risky levels. That's part of the reason why I want to take a little bit extra time here on alcohol. And because it's a lot of times we not see, not us, our clients or our consumers or the community members are not necessarily seeing the impact of it, even without having to have an alcohol use disorder, which is where we see a lot of our folks when we work in treatment. And so we'll go on from there. By the way, please add to the chat if you would like to add to the conversation here. Please just make sure that you raise your hand so that way I don't miss it, and then if we don't talk over each other. Is that okay with everybody? Okay, very cool. Thank you. So the concern behind alcohol consumption, I just spoke to some of it. There's much more, but I think some of the things, a couple of the points that really stand out is how much is related to so many circumstances and situations that the community deals with. And so, although it's looked at as a public health concern, I think what the insidious part of it is the fact that it plays a part in so many health conditions that people have. So being that it's a toxic psychoactive substances linked to over 200 diseases, which I think is phenomenal, that it is. And but it's also linked to so many health conditions and a lot of injuries. And some of the health risks include the cancer, liver disease, cardiovascular disease. When we think about alcohol, we do think a lot about how the liver is impacted. And still today, there are many people who are not as informed about how the damage happens. Many of us are just informed. Many of us think, many human beings in nature is like, if we have pain or we have a headache, we know how to take aspirin. A lot of folks are not as familiar with what happens with alcohol in terms of the liver, especially if they're thinking they're associating unhealthiness with some behavioral issues but instead of thinking about maybe how the liver might be damaged, even though you don't get symptoms, that's not something that commonly comes to mind for folks unless they come to us, unless we have an opportunity to share with them. So things like liver disease, cardiovascular, even mental health, all of these things are part of the damage that can happen or the effects that can happen from alcohol. So here, just briefly, just want to talk about why people drink in the first place. I mean, this country has a culture of, if you work hard during the week, like you can come home and relax with a drink or two. We see it in the media all the time. We see it, we've learned it as almost like a conditioned behavior because it's kind of normal. If you have a job and you do well, you can come home and de-stress, well, with a couple of drinks. And so it's become so normalized. And so, there's a variety of different reasons how people kind of start to drink. Studies show that reasons for drinking can be situational as well. So sometimes, it's the most common thing in the world. If you're going to dinner, you're going to a club, and you're going to the theater, that folks might want to meet for a drink first. It's a way of socializing. It's very, very common here. It's when people have wine with dinner. That's still for a long time all we ever heard was it's healthy to have a cup of wine with dinner. And things like that kind of get absorbed by society, and we act on those. Some of those are culturally related. And so culturally related things like having drinks around certain holidays or certain, like the first one that comes to mind for me, because I identify as a Latina, is I think of the coquito that's associated with the Christmas holidays. And so it kind of starts off with Thanksgiving and then Christmas and it's New Year's. Coquito is usually a trend that is in many families who are Latino, and not just from the original country of source, whether it's Dominican Republic, Puerto Rico, or any other initial country. But it's a cultural activity that we engage in here in the U.S. So thinking about it that way, not necessarily thinking about the potential impact. We think many times our perspective is in what we are used to doing, how we associate and celebrate. And so it could be culturally related. That's just one example, one of many. And so people drink to cope with stress. I mean, that we know when people have had a hard day at the job, having to deal with maybe multiple challenges or struggles in their life. You know, drinking to cope has been seen as that's American culture. You know, so unfortunately, we don't always get to be, even though we're sociable, even though we can be culturally informed, we don't always get to see the downside of things, some downside of behaviors. And so and how even when things seem like physically normal and whatever that normal is for a person, folks may be having effects of alcohol and not aware of it. And I think that's the biggest thing about this. So alcohol absorption, so enters and distributes through the body. It's not like while we might drink it and ingest initially like we do food, it's not absorbed through the typical through the digestive system, through the intestinal process. It's actually the alcohol or the ethanol of the alcohol is absorbed into the bloodstream. And so it's interesting because it does eventually get to the liver. The liver is the filter that cleans out the blood that goes throughout the circulatory system. So all other organs and functions that need the different nutrients that come from clean blood, you know, can function properly. And so entry and absorption, you know, it's most times what happens is, so it takes a little while before the alcohol is metabolized. And then, but at some point, you know, there is about something like 80%, 85% of the alcohol is broken down, is metabolized and broken down by the liver, and anything that might not be is excreted. And so there is a whole process of metabolism and that we'll talk about as we go forward. So some of the things, I thought that in order to make this a little interesting, is to kind of come up with a way to be a little creative in terms of sort of perspectives that some community members or some people may have. And so I thought this might be a nice way to kind of have this this presentation. So you tell me, you can put in your chat, fact or fiction. First of all, how many folks have heard that alcohol is an aphrodisiac? Anyone? Yeah, okay. Yeah, so there is such a thing as alcohol, as a thought process about alcohol being an aphrodisiac, which I've heard it, but that was years ago. I don't know if folks still think that way today, but still, some folks do have heard it. Okay, and so what do you think? Fact or fiction?
Fiction.
Okay, all right. Okay, a lot of folks fiction. It is fiction. And so here's the thing. Alcohol reduces inhibitions. And I think community members and people in general may be confused. It does relax someone. It does kind of might stimulate the initial interest or help somebody feel initially aroused, but it doesn't help the performance. It reduces the ability to perform. Hi, good morning, Antonio. What would you like to add?
Well, that question that you're posing, right? First of all, grand rising to everyone. That's on a case by case study, right? That we're not answering for the whole. We're answering for your individual experience, right?
This is based on research. So alcohol being thought about as an aphrodisiac is actually not, although that's the thinking that we come across often.
Okay.
So what is
okay?
Yeah. So yeah, this is everything I present here is not, it's not an opinion, it's based on research. Sometimes I'll give you examples of what I work with a client when I used to have services, but no, I'm not giving you opinions here. Hi, Susan. Good morning. Nice to see you here. Hey.
Good morning. Thank you, Diana, once again. Yeah, I mean, alcohol, obviously, as it said, reduces inhibitions. It can lead to initial attraction, you know, to someone who perhaps you may have be attracted to when you wake up sober. And it can lead to, you know, attempts at sexual encounters, but like you said, it reduces the performance. So it's technically no, it's not.
But so, and the reason, thank you, Susan. And the reason I add this, and to you, Antonio, and everybody, and the reason I add this is because I thought it was interesting that so many times we work with different people that we provide services to, and they bring those perceptions. And the perceptions are not always informed in fact. So the idea here is that even though someone might feel more comfortable, how many times have we heard or know folks in general, not just our clients, who need a drink just to relax, to be engaged with other folks in a community environment, in an event, to relax at a wedding, to relax, to be able to socialize with others. And so it reduces inhibitions. And initially, a person might feel interested in someone and maybe aroused, but the ability to follow through is a little limited. And I have some information for you. Hi, good morning, Tamika.
Good morning. I just wanted to comment because I'm just thinking out of the box, and also something that you said, because you at first said, you know, you don't really hear it as much anymore now. Back then, people would say or claim this is alcohol is an aphrodisiac, and just looking at the actual definition of what an aphrodisiac is, you know, and thinking, like you said, why people may think it helps them get that sexual desire because it lowers that inhibition. So I think that goes to that education piece of being miseducated, and maybe why we're not hearing it as much now. I mean, it just kind of contests to that educational piece, I think, just speaking of.
Yeah, if you're doing that kind of support, that kind of work, and that's and you're in that capacity to be able to have that kind of conversation or support with a particular client, you may want to be more familiar, more specific about what aphrodisiacs are and how they work. It's the alcohol piece that I think sometimes might be helpful to unpack with the client. Catherine, what did you want to add? Good morning.
Hi there. So as far as the question of alcohol being an aphrodisiac, alcohol is known to be the #1 date rape drug. So in, you know, some section of the population, there might be this idea, oh, you know, if I am able to ply someone or like, you know, coerce them to drink, they'll be more accessible sexually, right? So the idea of it being an aphrodisiac, it's not that it, you know, like you said, that it actually, you know, stimulates the parts of our brain that, you know, lead us to be turned on. It's that it can potentially lower inhibitions. It can physically lower someone's ability to, you know, abstain from an act, right?
Yeah.
So, I mean, kind of a darker take on it, but I believe very much there is a perception in some individuals that if you can, you know, feed another person liquor or alcohol, whatever, they're going to be easier to take advantage of.
You know, that could happen. We do have situations where where people have been assaulted because and maybe because they're weakened and because at first maybe they were kind of less inhibited, or maybe they're easier to overtake and control. And I'm starting to think about partner violence or just sexual assault in general. So let me just give you a little bit more on the sexual piece, because I thought it was important. So alcohol itself does arouse, you know, the libido initially, with what it does, but also after a while, because alcohol is a central nervous system depressant, you know, it does have that take where, you know, where the sensitivity can erode. And so alcohol can make people feel more relaxed and confident and eager for intimacy, but the impairment comes, like there's such a thing as brewer's droop, which means a higher consumption of alcohol can really lead to dysfunction and erectile dysfunction and vaginal and reduced vaginal lubrication. And so as a depressant, the nerve endings are nullified, so to speak. And so the sensations are nullified as well. We can start thinking about situations like Catherine said about, where it can go, where rapes and where making impaired decisions and putting where a person might put themselves in a position for injury or so, we can start thinking about that as well. And right now, I just want to think about the alcohol effects. It can go in so many different directions depending on the circumstances of the individual. We know that the impairment cognitively and even physically, can certainly, really speak to a lot of this, and we'll talk some more. Heavy drinking can cause long-term heavy drinking can cause long-term dysfunction, including impotence. And so for some folks, even though some folks, sometimes people might confuse wanting to do something with the ability to do something. And I think that's what gets confused when folks think having a couple of drinks would be great to have good sex, that kind of thing. And it's like, are they aware of the impact that it has physically on individuals? So there's a couple of different things that are going on there, and perceptions are not always informed. Let me give you another one. And this is fact or fiction. Women are more likely to drink alcohol than men. What do you think? Right. So, it's interesting. It should be fiction because it's not accurate. There is data, though, that does show that young women have been binge drinking more than their male peers. So I probably should have that as fiction, not fact. And so in 2026, between 2025 and 2026, a lot of data came out speaking to increases in consumption for females. And so, and excuse the binary reference here, I don't mean to be I don't mean not to be inclusive. Much of the research that comes from NIAAA or and in general uses female sex at birth and male sex at birth as references. I'm not speaking about gender identity, just speaking about the biology and how the alcohol works on that. So please forgive me. This sounds like I'm not trying to be affirming here. So the thing with female sex at birth who or women who are starting to binge drink, there's a lot of information on that. There's men have been historically known to drink more than women. Now, the fact that the numbers are getting closer in proximity, and that's pretty huge because they always used to be maybe just over a quarter of the population of women who drank, would drink, which doesn't even come close to what this is now. 57 to 51% is a pretty close gap. And so we're seeing it on the rise. And so that is especially important to understand with each individual, like what is helping that happen. We know that heavy drinking with women has increased 80% over the recent decade. And so 80% within their numbers, and so all the way up to 2021, we saw some alcohol-related deaths increase by 35% in women compared to 27% in men. And I think one of the interesting things is, why are we seeing this? And we might find, and some of the data is not conclusive, but it is suggesting that possibly, the juggling of so many different responsibilities in terms of going to school, going to work, being a family person, juggling many responsibilities and the higher stresses coming with it, it is suggested that it may be playing a part in the increase in the drinking. And I always talk about how many times human beings are looking for a buffer to kind of so they can get through situations. So maybe that has a part to do with it. It's not as conclusive from what I read from the research. Morning, Maria.
Hi, good morning. I work at a college counseling center, and like most of our centers across the country and even into other countries definitely saw a decrease overall in alcohol use with COVID. starting to see it creep back up and starting to see it in equal parts men and women, where prior to this, we might have seen more men coming in for alcohol-related violations or alcohol-related hospitalizations. But as we see students start to kind of drink again and get back a little bit into that culture, we're seeing equal amounts. That's just data that we keep because we feel it's important in terms of targeted interventions.
Yeah. Well, I see. So I think I have the reference here is getting closer to the data that you're pointing to. I think it's so important to collect the data. And I think just speaking to your point, Maria, is, to understand how different sources collectively are identifying patterns. That's the biggest benefit for us who work with communities in general, is to understand, are we seeing this within the folks that we provide service to? Is it happening? Is there a gender-based situation going on? Are there situational issues? Social and behavioral, changes, have a multitude of different factors that are pushing and pulling people in different ways. So understanding what that might be for your community and or the individual persons that you're working with is especially important. I love the data because the data identifies patterns. And if I see my folks in that and within those statistics, it helps me understand what kind of questions I might want to ask and what I might anticipate. Antonio, yes.
That's a valid point, but I still believe men hold the crown as far as alcohol consumption. Now, it has increased over the years, especially in younger women, but I still believe the camaraderie of men getting together, thrown in with the masculinity view, that alcohol still plays, especially in like sporting events and outings.
The cultural piece maybe play a part, and that's true. What I know that when I used to work, when I was doing direct services, what I saw may have been drastically different from what the data shows. So I'm only going to work off of what the data shows, so it can inform how I might move forward. Some of the data that I see that historically have seen that men have usually drank more than women. And that's like a very general question. We're going to kind of hit the more specifics in time. Roger, what would you like to add? Good morning.
Good morning. I would just like that. I disagree with that statement. In my 52 years of living, what I've noticed is that when it comes to women in relation to alcohol use disorder, it's kind of like pushed to the back burner and not really acknowledged, because men and alcohol consumption is pushed to the front, like just like Antonio said, as far as like sporting events and things like that. We're put in front of the camera like a message to society, while women, on the other hand, their alcohol consumption is pushed to the background and not really paid attention to. But if you look around society, even today, I believe that just as many women as men have alcohol use disorder.
It's evening it out. And the data and the reference that I use is certainly talking about closing the gap. Just want to be clear on one thing. What you might see might not be everything that's going on in the country. The only reason why I bring up those statistics is so we can get informed of what's happening overall. What we may see with our community may not be the same exactly from one person to another. And so my job here is just to present you the research-based data and how it applies in our work. And so kind of work with that. So I know that what you might see, also keep an open mind for other things that you don't usually see, but might discover behind some of the information we're giving here. Jacqueline? Good morning, Jacqueline. I haven't seen you in a minute.
Hi, good morning, everybody. Gentlemen, I'm about to show my age, okay? I believe it's just as equal. We just put it in a nice glass to have you be fooled by the fact that we can't drink you under the table, because I have a wine glass that's this big and you taking shots. I'm drunker than you, and I'm standing there, and on top of that, I'm making you pay for it. Okay, so a lot of the young girls who come through our facility are they always go, I only drink wine. I'm not drinking any of the brown stuff. And I let them know, for those of you who I'm about to go back, Sanford and Son, Ned the Wino. Where do you think they got the name from? They're winos, from drinking wine. Wine is alcohol, but because it's not considered a harsh drug, you get that as well, that it's only a little bit of liquor. I might have 3 or 4 glasses, when I go out with my girls or whatever, but you have to get poured out of a Uber. So what's the difference? Thank you.
Thanks, Jacqueline. All right, so just to clear this up, we're working with statistics, what the data is showing, which is patterns and what we're seeing. And then you're going with what you're used to working with. Now bring it all together for yourselves. That's why I said, see if you can find what you're doing in the communities you're working with what we see here. Perceptions and behaviors is different than quantified data. And even the data is not exact. The data gives you patterns. It shows that, and that's helpful for us who work with folks, because we want to understand, okay, what to anticipate, how to be better prepared for when we come across certain alcohol-related issues with clients. So I really appreciate the discussion, but I'm going to go back. But let's talk about why, this thing with females, with women and versus men. This is not a gender fight. We're not arm wrestling here today. That's not what this is about. But in terms of data, there is reasons why there are differences. So cisgender females at birth, or female sex at birth, maybe that's the best way to say it, tend to have less body water. The body needs water to break down, to metabolize the ethanol in the alcohol. And so that this tends to be less water in female bodies than there is in sex at birth male bodies. There's also less production of the ADH and ALDH enzymes. Those are enzymes specifically produced to break down, and that are used that the body uses specifically to break down the ethanol. So there's less in females than there is compared to male sex at birth. And so that's something to consider as to the high risk. And when we see numbers and statistics and we see a closer gap, that's a huge issue. We see a high gap, it's a huge issue for any person that you're working with. I'll put it that way. And so in terms of gender differences, that's what I wanted to make sure I put that here, because not only that's relevant, not just understanding how alcohol might work in a female body, but it also has a lot to do with the recommendations of the appropriate or moderate drinking guidelines, why there's a difference in those. And so drinking alcohol, and then the other thing about drinking alcohol during pregnancy, can result in fetal alcohol spectrum disorders, affecting, development of the fetus. One of the things that is interesting about alcohol is that it works very similar, not exactly, but similar to how opioids work in the body. And so with chronic use, a person can develop a physical dependence, which is not addiction. Addiction has a particular criteria. Substance use disorder alcohol use disorder has a particular criteria. And yet when the body gets used to having a certain amount of alcohol in the system, the person can benefit from things like, there's some medications for alcohol use disorders that can help that person. Even the person who has opioid use disorder who's pregnant can benefit from these medication programs. And so the thing is, the fetal alcohol syndromes help, the development of the brain to develop physically. It can actually associate, it's associated also with birth defects. So some of the things to consider. And remember, I said I was going to touch on some tidbits here and there, and you folks can fill in the gaps. So, fact to fiction. I don't know anybody who hasn't heard this before. Coating your stomach with a milky solution will slow the absorption of alcohol and keep a person from getting drunk or sick. Have we ever heard that? Think about it. So how many, sometimes we've had folks who had wanted to make sure they ate enough or had taken something to coat their stomach So maybe, so that way they can protect themselves when they go drinking. Oh, I'm sorry, I didn't see your hand up. Go ahead, Antonio.
That is true. My grandfather did it for years. He would drink milk before he'd go on binge drinking. And to coat the stomach, he would drink milk. Always milk before he would take his shots of gin. So the men that he hung with were mostly all construction workers. So that's what they would do throughout the day, drink milk so they wouldn't have to eat so they can consume more alcohol.
You know what's interesting, Antonio, is that my father, he would do the same thing in his younger days. He's no longer with me in a physical sense, but he just, but so you're saying this is fact. But that's the perspective my dad had too. So let's talk about this. Summer, what would you like to add here?
Hi, I've also seen videos that if you're trying to like help someone get off alcohol, like if you add like cinnamon or something to it, it could also like create the urge for them to like reduce the use of like, having alcohol all the time. I've been seeing videos on social media about it too.
Okay, where's the source of those videos? Summer, if you don't mind my asking.
I would have to go back and look because I think I saw it on Facebook and on Instagram. So I would have to go back and look and see if I can find it, what the source is.
All right, so I'm gonna give you what the facts, what the data shows, what the research shows right now, and you can even Google it if you want. So I was telling somebody the other day, just be careful about those videos and understand where they come from, who is the source of it, especially with AI being in the mix. Even AI, you ask it the question, it'll take a lot of information related to that question. It's not necessarily accurate. So that's kind of something I want to put out there. Those videos too, unless they're made from a credible source, it's like getting information, going to a website, but it's more of a podcast, a more an individual, not necessarily a credible source. And credible source meaning folks who have provide the research, provide the citations, all the information that's related to justify the information that they're exposing to the public. Very similar to like what I do here. So coating your stomach. Let me go back to this. Coating your stomach, that's the perspective. Coating your stomach with a milky solution will slow the absorption of alcohol and keep a person from getting drunk or sick. And my dad used to do what Antonio's dad used to do. The stomach cannot be coated to prevent alcohol absorption. The stomach, what happens is people are encouraged. Okay, so here's the thing. This is where it might get mixed up a little bit. When you eat food, what happens is you can slower the absorption. Food that are rich in carbohydrates, carbs, before starting to drink alcohol. The thing is, food also shows the rate of the stomach kind of like emptying into the intestines. And so absorption of alcohol occurs at a much faster rate. So what food can do is slow it down. The stomach itself cannot be coated that way. The milk will not stop it from getting absorbed. Food can slow it down, but it still goes into the bloodstream. Alcohol in a small water-soluble molecule can easily pass through the lining of the digestive tract. In the bloodstream, once it's in the bloodstream, it carries to the liver and goes throughout the body. Let me just give you some more information. Oh, I didn't have a slide after that. So this is something very similar. Coffee, cold showers, and exercise will help someone sober up. I know we've seen this in the movies. We've seen this on TV. How many people feel this is true or not true? Who says it's true, not true? Fact or fiction? Yeah. We just talked about a whole bunch of reasons why, it's not true. Thank you. So none of the methods work. The blood alcohol concentration only diminishes at a set slow pace by the liver as the liver metabolizes the alcohol. And here's the other thing is that if somebody has other health conditions that the liver is involved in, okay, even if they don't have an alcohol use disorder, that may be part of their challenge. Because colds and showers, what happens on the outside does not affect the metabolism on the inside. And so the blood alcohol level still has to be metabolized, still has to be processed out. And so drinkers may feel more alert after drinking coffee, but that doesn't mean the alcohol went anywhere. It still needs time. Remember, most of us know that to process one drink, whatever one standard drink is, it takes a good, like, give or take a few minutes. It takes about an hour. So when someone is being given coffee, they might be more alert, but it doesn't diminish the amount of alcohol that still has to be processed out. That's a whole internal process. So let me go into, so I think this is really interesting. So thank you, because it really incited some really interesting conversation here. But it also shows how much you folks are coming across these perspectives with different folks. So consequences of alcohol use. Most of the total economic losses occurred due to alcohol-related situations. So 72% work productivity is reduced as a result of alcohol. Healthcare expenses to treating issues caused by excessive drinking. I think that is higher because we see so much in the emergency room, and a lot of the I had one statistic up yesterday that had 178,000 deaths a year, and those are lower now behind alcohol, but it's always related to an emergency room situation. Most times related to an emergency room situation. So it affects the criminal justice system. The motor vehicle accidents related to extreme levels of alcohol use, 40% of fatal motor vehicle crashes. And so when we think about alcohol-related deaths, we also think about the person who's riding in the car, not just the person who's driving it. And so the brain, so different impacts. This will be a great cheat sheet for you. So the brain is impacted. It slows down the brain's communication. The cognitive impairment after several drinks in one sitting can certainly begin to show. Cardiovascular issues are affected. We know about the liver. The liver is really interesting. Did a lot of work around that. And one of the toughest things, what I was saying earlier, is that many people are not necessarily going to associate a problem with drinking if they feel fine and they can still go to work and they associate behaviors and circumstances with the healthiness or the unhealthiness of their consumption. And so, guess what? The liver doesn't really show a symptom until, there's substantial damage. Often it's very hard if it's decompensated, gotten to that point. That's when it starts to show some symptoms, not just physical symptoms, but some biomarkers. The blood works will show the metabolic processes start to be affected. The liver, after a while, cannot regenerate. It's the only organ that can regenerate. If the liver is, there's a couple of things I'm going to show you now. If the liver is impacted and is damaged, and that happens over a long, long period of time with chronic alcohol use. And so by all that time, instead of doing prevention because you see symptoms, a lot of people are not going to see it. It's asymptomatic, at the beginning. And so we know that liver has a problem, but we don't want to wait till it, till somebody has a problem. Sometimes what can help is understanding what are the patterns in the person's life. What are the family patterns? What are the behavioral issues that they deal with, the stresses and the struggles they deal with in their daily life? But alcohol has an impact on all of this. Pancreas, associated with a lot of different cancers, immune system, it affects the immune system, lowers the capacity for the immune system to work effectively, works on the bones, renal system, central nervous system depressant. It can help gain weight. Help a person gain weight because it's very heavy in calories. That might be an issue for some people who are maybe diabetic, stomach issues. How many times if someone has had gastric issues, goes into the emergency room, and they don't get screened for alcohol, they might be, someone might misdiagnose them with a gastric related condition. So it's really important to understand that alcohol can have an impact on so many different things. That's why I put insidious and uncanny here. And so I have one more. Who hasn't heard this? Alcohol is a great way to relax and reduce stress. Fact or fiction? Fiction. And you know why you know that? Because you work in the field, because you do what you do. Because if you're watching all these TV programs and these movies and all that, and then also in society at large, one of the things I mentioned is one of the cultural activities that many people engage in to relax after a day with a drink. If it was just a drink, that can help, but it's really just a drink. So it's a fiction. It's fiction. Alcohol increases the level of stress in the body. Adrenaline levels start to increase as people drink. And so when I talked about it's more of the perception of the thing. We might feel more relaxed when we drink alcohol, but it actually comes under additional stress. And for people who are very stressed, and I think most of the population in this country, to a certain degree, always has, is used to dealing with stress at this point, and a way to have a to use alcohol as a stress reducer might be a coping mechanism for many folks. It's just a challenge that comes when, if one drink makes you feel good, you may want to have two or three, and that's when it becomes a problem. And so, let me just tell you about some of the things that alcohol does. There's such a thing as biphasic response. And that biphasic response is the early stages of what a person may feel. Get a couple of drinks, and the person has a certain blood alcohol level. And then, initially when that first person feels that buzz, that euphoric effect, dopamine is the neurotransmitter associated with satisfaction. So a rush of dopamine can help someone feel elated at first. And that's what we were talking about in terms of it being like an aphrodisiac, but then it diminishes because it does suppress the central nervous system. So the stimulation, when the point of diminishing returns, that is talking about how beyond that level, the body's ability to process alcohol efficiently starts to decrease. And so the depressant phase is that what works on the central nervous system. When the more alcohol there is in that body, the more that person, the more the stimulation effects are decreasing, and the depressing effects, start to increase. And so when I've had folks who also have like a diagnosis of depression, one of the things we've had to talk about is alcohol, like when they use alcohol. Very often when you're not feeling great, somebody might just naturally, gravitate to having a drink. It's just that when somebody feels good with one drink and feels a nice little buzz, maybe 2 or 3 drinks might keep them there. But 2 or 3 drinks or 4 drinks and one sitting can be dangerous, especially when you have other conditions. And so why does it feel relaxing? So it feels relaxing because alcohol is a downer. So it's more sedative, If you're stressed and high strung, that's when people use a drink to relax, It can temporarily slow down some symptoms. And so it reduces the inhibition, as we talked about earlier, by nullifying the sensitivity. It's really the neurotransmitters in the body. So it creates a false short-lived sense of calm, unless it's inhibitions. And it is short-lived. And just very rarely do people, some folks who know how to nurture drink, know how to work within that initial impact and stay there. Tension reduction theory is historically and culturally, alcohol has been used to calm the nerves. And yes, individuals often feel it relieves stress, but it's a temporary illusion. And so why does it cause stress? Well, studies have shown that alcohol sometimes exacerbates stress. So we've seen, and I thought that was really important to kind of include the reference here. The data is showing me that, when folks are like crying in their beer, they've come to that depressive state if they're dealing with struggles, and that crying in the beer quote is really referring to that when someone actually comes down. And so it is acting as a depressant on your central nervous system. Alcohol interferes with restorative REM or restorative eye movement, IMF stage of sleep. That just means when there's movement with the eyes and the brain, and that has to do partially has to do with getting a good restful sleep. But see, when it comes to alcohol, what happens is you can actually get there's this thing that happens in the biphasic response that helps someone kind of just wake up. It's like a second wind, so to speak. And it can heighten anxiety and irritability and make the stress harder to handle. So it makes, like if you're trying to sleep, that would be a very difficult time. And we already know that it impairs judgment and decision-making processes. Let me see. So tolerance is about how the body adapts. Adapts to the same amount of alcohol in the bloodstream. So it gives the experience, the balance of 0.08 blood alcohol content or blood alcohol level, which is the current level that law enforcement use when they pull somebody over for DWI, and they measure. It's that or higher can certainly impact cognitive and motor skills. Cognitive functions and motor skills. So it's also the point when you drinking more will not make you feel better or have a better time. You might get drunker, but the negative risks of drinking will increase. And so alcohol alters the brain chemistry. So not dissimilar from some of the other substances that, psychoactive substances that we work with our clients about. Regular consumption of alcohol changes the chemistry of the brain. Very much like another disorder that just, rewires the reward pathways in the brain is similar to alcohol, does the same thing. But the thing is, there are certain neurotransmitters that are related or associated with depressants, and others like dopamine that are related to like feeling stimulated. So there's less serotonin, a key chemical involved in causing depression. And so here, our brains are they try to balance out, the different chemicals coming into it and initiating the different processes impacted by the different chemicals and neurotransmitters that are affecting function. So there is, to some effect, our thoughts of being, the thoughts of the person, the behavior, their capacity, their ability to move, to do, somebody who can lift, 25 pounds easily may have a hard time trying to struggle with even lifting, let alone actually be able to pick it up. So drinking can initially relax a person, like we talked about, but more drinking gives you other situations. It could, many times we will see someone who gets super irritable. They may have a lot of struggles and challenges in their life. And you know what? Some of the effects are, you can see the aggressiveness, or some people can, their depression gets exacerbated. They get more anxious, So their short-term effects, we know, are slurred speech, and sometimes regurgitating, the headaches that come afterwards, distorted visions, impaired judgment. And this can happen in short term. And some people tend to have that also in long term. And so when we think about an alcohol use disorder, we think about, first of all, there's 11-point criteria to meet. You have to meet 2 or better of an 11-point criteria for different disorders, whether it's alcohol, opioids, stimulants, methamphetamines, whatever it is. With alcohol, there are certain neurotransmitters that are associated with those downing feelings, those depressant feelings. So that's the GABA, the glutamate, the dopamine. And so those are the ones that are involved when it comes to alcohol. So the mood changes, the thinking changes, the neurological functions can change. And so over time, what happens is a person might want to stop and can't stop, or a person uses it beyond what they initially expected to use. So if you can look at the different references in the 11-point criteria for an alcohol use disorder, you'll find that a lot of those, like the behavioral aspects of things, are the very things that happen to somebody who has an alcohol use disorder. Not everybody has to be lose all opportunities of working, of going to school, of being able to pay bills, of having a home over their head, because that alcohol use disorder doesn't have a certain poster child attached to it. Anyone can actually function and still have an alcohol use disorder. And so the whole idea is that mood, behavior, neurological functioning is impacted. And the blood alcohol content continues to, is either elevating or decreasing. So it depends, but the body adaptation to the amount of alcohol it depends on, it needs, a person can actually go through withdrawal symptoms behind alcohol. So the more symptoms you have, the more urgent the need for change. So a health professional can conduct a formal assessment of your symptoms to see if AUD is present. I'm always talking about the importance of what a screening tool does. Many of us have not necessarily, we don't necessarily look for the screening tool once someone is assessed. We're looking for somebody who's already got a disorder. There are some folks who may not have a disorder, who might have a screening, who might indicate that they might benefit from an assessment. The whole idea, and that can be done by a health professional, but that can be done with someone in New York State, with somebody with it was an addiction professional like that has a KSAC credential, you know, and across the states, you have that opportunity as well. And so the withdrawal signs, we see, and you folks can speak to this better than I because you're working with folks directly. I talk about my experience when I was doing direct services before. And so autonomic hyperactivity. There are some things that we have seen in folks when they haven't been able to get a drink after a while. And we see the tremors coming and we see the shaking coming. We can see some folks sweating profusely. Some folks are not able to hold food down at times, you know, certainly, you know, suffer from insomnia as well. And so that shaking and maybe being off balance every once in a while, you know, anxiety, all of that is all part of what alcohol withdrawal signs are. And that's why those medications for alcohol use disorder is very helpful. Trying to think of which one are those. There are naltrexone and acamprosate is one of them, and it's one of the, and naltrexone like Vivitrol is usually, Vivitrol is the one that most treatment organizations use for alcohol use disorder. And what it does is just helps to stabilize that body, helps to kind of address those receptors where those chemical signals come in. And so while the body is adapting to not having the alcohol and that medication is taking its place instead, while that person has a chance to kind of regroup and relearn how to, you know, live life without using alcohol and have other supports as well. Yes, Roger.
Oh, from my personal experience with this drug, it didn't really have that. It didn't have that effect on me at all. It probably had the absolute opposite effect for me. I don't know if it's because of my metabolism or whatever, but I didn't experience none of these effects with that drug. Actually, I don't know if it had something to do with I was taking high blood pressure medication at the time, so I don't know if the two drugs didn't mix, but it was like it had me falling out in the middle of the day type of effect. It didn't. None of these effects that I'm reading right here was evident at all.
Well, I can't even opinionate on the situation because I don't know the details and definitely not the physician in charge. And so I appreciate you saying that. Their alcohol withdrawal is very similar to opioids, where somebody who's been chronically drinking and even at different levels of chronically drinking, that body will go through some type of withdrawal if they just cease abruptly, if they just stop altogether. Doesn't mean that everybody goes through this to extensive levels, but folks go through combination of this and one or two of these, you know. And if you did it at all, and though you had some other things in your body that you shared about, I hear what you're saying. I won't put an opinion on it. I'm just going to work with what we see with folks, and part of the reason why we even have the Vivitrol, the naltrexone, to be able to, you know, help with these folks. So I think the details of your situation probably have more factors in it. I just like the fact that you talked about it. Appreciate you sharing and trusting us enough that you shared it here. But thank you for that. I don't think everybody has to have withdrawal symptoms and everybody has it to different levels, but these are the extremes that can happen and to different levels, to different intensities. And so that's important to understand too. And so, okay. Alcohol in older adults. So like I said, tidbits here and there. So if I want to give you a full picture, I will do a 2-day training, but I don't think I'm not so sure it's necessary. This is enough to just give you enough information to remind us of some of the things we know and maybe a couple of details that we may have forgotten. So heart function alterations. And so studies include, there's been some publications that have been showing that even moderate amounts of alcohol consumption, like even for sometimes for some folks, depending, okay, so this is kind of similar to what you were saying, Roger. So depending on their situation and the individual, and particularly with older adults, because there's slow metabolism and there's other age degeneration conditions. Many times people, when they are older, over 65, 70, 75, 80, what happens is there are conditions that might have chronic pain and other situations. The heart is not pumping as fast. The heart, all the metabolic processes inside do slow down. And so even moderate drinking for some folks, like 1 to 2 drinks a day, might not be a healthy thing for them. It might not be. There's cardiovascular aging. Alcohol consumption can accelerate the natural aging process. That's an interesting piece of information to know. It also can impact the heart and blood vessels. Because it's a toxin and it seemed like it's associated with expedited aging, and included it's also has to do with inflammation. And one of the things when a person gets older that they're very familiar with, I think all of us at some point probably are, but inflammation and arthritis, increases, especially if it's genetically part of your family makeup, so that can help exacerbate it. I'm not saying extreme. I'm not saying somebody can't move. Somebody's in different position that their limbs and their joints always hurt all the time. To different degrees, it can certainly affect that. So the medication interactions that interact with alcohol, a lot of times, so you mentioned, Roger mentioned his high blood pressure. People have high blood pressure. People take medications for depression and anxiety. People take daily medications for some gastric issues. People take medications for a lot of different situations that tend to be more prominent or more common in older adults because of the aging process. And so when someone is not used to understanding that maybe the alcohol they were used to having is probably not as good as idea now, because they have some medications they're taking, some health conditions they're working with. Giving that information is really important. There are times, okay, and this is and I do this thing on perceptions about with older adults. There are some providers that when they work with an older adults, there's sometimes the perception is that some of the things that happen is that some of the symptoms that happen from alcohol use or substance use mimic other health conditions that are likely to be seen more readily with older adults. And so, the balance may be off because of age-related issues, but it's important to have a screening or at least ask the questions, because you want to understand, make sure that it's not alcohol-related. And if it is, you can address it. The cognitive decline that most people expect from an elderly person is not necessarily something that's happening because it's natural to the current age, but it can be happening because of alcohol consumption. But if we don't even screen for it, then we don't know we may not be supporting them as best as we can. And so sometimes, and that's one of the things I was mentioning yesterday was like, even with folks who may have gastric issues, when you're older, you're likely to have digestive issues. It can be considered as, age-related issue when it may actually be alcohol related, but we won't know that unless we screen, unless we ask the questions. So the other thing I wanted to talk about was alcohol in adolescence, because brain development is such an issue. And while we haven't seen a huge increase in alcohol and other substance use with adolescents, there are different things that they are doing. They're doing energy drinks, they're still vaping, they are drinking alcohol. And I think they're drinking alcohol more than they're doing other substances, according to the research. Don't quote me on that. But here's the thing about alcohol. And mind you, and this is also speaking to resourcefulness, because you have to be 21 to buy alcohol. So if someone under 21, 15 or 16 is accessing alcohol in some kind of way, or on a regular basis, or with their peers, that's something to consider. The thing is that how do we have a conversation with the youth? So one of the things, giving them information so they can make informed choices is a really effective approach. Teenagers understand information, they just need to get it. And it's just how we give it that makes a difference on whether or not they're going to be receptive, so they can make healthier decisions for themselves. So the brain development, the brain development continues on until someone's like around 25 years of age. Some research says until 30 years of age. The whole point is it continues to develop. So when you're thinking about an adolescent like 13, 14, 16, 17, development is still happening, not just in the brain, but physically. And so there could be some disruption with alcohol, especially if they do it a lot. So it says here, disrupts the development of the frontal lobe. The frontal lobe is where we kind of make, we weigh out the pros and cons of different situations and decide on a decision on what to do next regarding anything. And so if that is disrupting, if that's not working well, and what's really happening is the alcohol is coming into the limbic system, that place where experiences and associated feelings and sensations are stored. If that's running the show, and with adolescents who don't have a fully developed brain, that is probably what's happening more than the prefrontal, the frontal lobe. So it really disrupts healthy development of that, and consequently healthy decision making, healthy cognitive processes. Certainly, we know about memory with folks who drink too much. It's the same thing with adolescents, and so it can lead to alcohol-induced blackouts. The other thing is about excessive drinking can lead to liver disease and affect puberty. So it's interesting. One of the things I know about youth is that many youth can have 2 or 3 drinks in one sitting, while an adult, and this is just for the sake of making a point, and an adult can have 2 or 3 drinks in one sitting. The adult may show signs of impairment, of balance impairment. The youth may not. This is interesting. With the younger bodies, that's not necessarily what's obvious. And so something to think about. So the physical effects, it's also about the conditioning and getting into the habit. Also at this time, the developmental stages also include how you interact with others, how you engage with peers, how you are in your world, how you deal with situations. And when I think about, drinking as a buffer, that might be an unhealthy coping mechanism that young people can develop. Hi, Carolyn.
Lot on social media and like just these different places where they say that Gen Z is like drinking a lot less than like millennials and Gen X. And I just want to know kind of the accuracy of that.
No, it is true. That's why I mentioned earlier that so alcohol and the substance use that we've seen in the statistics in terms of use has been consistent for the last several years, since 2021. And so it hasn't increased. And there's also some patterns that while like from high school perspective, while there may be more in like the 9th and 10th grade who might drink, over time, by the time they get to the 12th grade, it starts to lessen. Also, the college folks, so those numbers are not as high as they used to be. I'm thinking about the ones that actually are drinking, the ones with stresses in their life, the ones with trauma in their life, the ones with challenges in their life. And so even though it's not increased, we still want to be aware of how it can affect someone, because that way, when you have a conversation with them, you can refer to all these things and in a tailored way. So those numbers have not increased. It's become stable, which shows, I think, not a better way to maybe deal with stressors and challenges is just not everybody, is abstaining. You have quite a few young people who are. You still have quite a few who are.
Thanks.
So I would suggest, Carolyn, that you could check the Monitoring the Future. Please mute yourself. Carolyn, you could check Monitoring the Future report. They publish a report every year. I believe they have one for 2025. I don't think they've done 2026 yet. And there is a really good resource of some of the most accurate statistics that have been gathered. They're a good resource.
What report is that?
Monitoring the Future.
Okay, thanks.
Monitoring the Future 2025. Put that in there and see what you get. You're gonna like it. It's a go-to resource.
Thanks.
Hi, Maria. What would you like to add?
Yeah, just from the perspective of a substance abuse specialist in a college setting who's been doing it for years. I mean, the reality of the situation is that when COVID hit, all of those young people were in with their parents. They did not have any experience with drinking. Their parents were monitoring them, so they didn't have the opportunity to drink. Zoom education, one of the priorities historically had been health, and now no longer was that a priority. So we're seeing these cohorts of students who are not drinking to drinking less, not getting the education because now it's no longer a priority in school. So they're not even learning about alcohol consumption or how to do it safely or harm reduction interventions. Um, you have that now hitting across with someone made a comment about money. That is now, colliding with the economy, and students just need money to get through college, so they don't have as much dispensable income for drinking. You're also kind of running into a lot of influencers who are talking about health and who are talking about what you need to do to be healthy and how that can lead to a better life, whether you want to believe them or not. They're out there, and this generation, Gen Z, is really being influenced that. So I think there are a confluence of things going on that really is lending itself to less drinking, but less education. So when we do see an episode of drinking, I have students coming in after a night being hospitalized for alcohol and toxicity. They have no clue what constitutes a drink. They have no clue about, there are students now that I'm seeing that don't even know what a BAC chart is with regards to 0.08 or what's safe for them or what they should be drinking for their body weight. So I'm just kind of thinking out loud when you're talking about what's going on. Someone also made a point, yeah, we are seeing an uptick in cannabis use, but it's legal now. And now there's an uptick in vaping as opposed to cigarette smoking. So now you have upticks in nicotine use as well as cannabis use in vapes. So there's a whole lot going on. I think we're really on the verge of a paradigm shift in terms of adolescents and young adults and substance use. And I think just stay tuned to the data, stay tuned to what we're going to be seeing over the next few years.
Thanks, Maria. Marietta, I saw your hand up. Where are you?
Well, okay. I'm from another part of town
Okay.
where alcohol and weed go hand in hand. So I don't know about statistics, but I know what I see and I know who I work with because I work in this field. And kids are going to be kids and they're going to experiment. And some of them from the age of 8 and 9. So I think the pandemic actually made it worse, in my humble opinion. I'm not a doctor or anything of that nature, but working in this field for the last 25 years, that's what I see. And the worst part of it now is that they cutting the weed with fentanyl and the vapes with fentanyl. So the kids are really at risk now. So yes, they need more education about the side effects of this stuff. We're great to tell you the side effects of Tylenol and Sudafed. What about the side effects of this drinking and drugging? Thank you.
Thank you. I know we're all seeing different things in our areas, but I love that we're sharing this information because that prepares us to anticipate what might be coming down the pipe. Hi, Carolyn. Unmute yourself, please. I see you muted.
I'm sorry. I just wanted to make a really quick point. I'm in North Carolina. I know we're from all over, but marijuana is not legal here. With no outlook of it becoming legal anytime soon. So that does change. I just wanted to make that point that it is legal and has been legal in a lot of places, but there's still a lot of places it's not.
Yeah, this is true. So your point is really good because the reality here is that everybody's working within different communities and different areas, and you're seeing different things. And that's why when I put out some information is, do you see your community here? What do you see? And if there's something that you're not seeing, is there something you want to ask about because we're presenting it here because we're showing some patterns. So hopefully you can. It doesn't mean that everything applies. If it doesn't apply, you let it fly, as they say. But what I'm saying here is what you do see. What you do see is what you're seeing in your area. It doesn't mean it's the same thing that's happening everywhere else. Just like the statistic that identified just the pattern. would it help you to ask certain questions of certain members in the community members that you're working with, that kind of thing. So thank you everybody for your comments. Antonio.
Yeah, I like all the comments that were made. Just wanted to add, we also have to take into consideration that both of these topics, right, what the young lady before the one that just spoke on, we're in a shift today where those things are socially accepted, right? So even though you might say it can do harm, we're still putting it on every corner. I don't know if that makes sense, but it makes sense to me. That means you can go to any market, any restaurant, anywhere, and get alcohol without no problem, right? So that's the thing that, we can educate ourselves, but how do we reduce it? Reducing it is by being able to hold each other accountable. Other than that, it's always going to be a top 10. I think it's number one as far as nicotine and alcohol. I think they're the top two as far as gateway. But at the same time, what it does is it's socially accepted. So it's easy for someone to reach out to it and say, I need it as a relaxer.
I totally get that. And that's what I spoke to before. No matter what perspective or perception that you come across with your different community members, there's information here that we're talking about that you can use to tailor what effects it may have in them. We can go through the macro and we get to the micro. We could take all this information and we pick and choose what's going to be relevant in a conversation with folks. I don't want to generalize anything. I really don't, because everything that one person sees is valid and you're working with it, and then you see it in another place and it looks a certain way and you're able to share what's helping you. The whole idea is there's so much diversity, and for that one person that we might be used to seeing in the community, we might be used to seeing maybe not as much use of alcohol, maybe more use of maybe the energy drinks, maybe the vaping, we might find one or two, we might find or come across somebody, a couple of youth or a couple of adults who are using and whose alcohol use is having an impact on them. Although we don't want to go by what we're used to seeing. We want to make sure that we are being very person-centered for each and every person. So, so what we see in one place and what we see in another place, all of that is valid. It's just that there's no one set approach because there's different issues. It's how you screen, it's how you convey the information, and how they can make informed choices. So that's how we want to tailor it. So I'll give you tidbits of this and that, but you all just share different perspectives that you come across that is helpful for us to just keep in mind, because we are likely to come across it with our own communities as well. And so I can go here and there and all over the place in terms of what the alcohol does to the body and all that. Then you have to tailor it. So part of that is understanding what constitutes a standard drink. And in our world today, this did come from the NIAAA folks, the National Institute on Alcohol Abuse and Alcoholism. They're using all those old schematic terms that are not even part of the DSM-5, but still NIAAA is a leading source on alcohol. And I also like for anybody who's interested in where to get the data from, I also like going to the veteran sites, the VA. They also have such wonderful research there, very informative. And so a standard drink is, depending on who your person is and how you set the stage and, just to have a conversation with somebody, you have to understand, and to help them reduce alcohol. And with youth, we know with people under 21, we don't want to encourage any kind of alcohol, but we certainly want to understand at least some of the basics for ourselves as providers, so we know how to tailor conversation. Let's understand that a standard drink could be a can of beer, but it can also be a glass of wine. It depends on what the person drinks. And then it's the vessels that they have, the amount of liquid and how much they drink within a finite period of time is very important. And so the recommendations, okay, up until 2025 used to come from the 2020 from the dietary guidelines. NIAAA used to work with them, and a lot of other and they have worked with a lot of specialists across the country, nutritionists and so on. But the dietary guidelines used to be included here or the NIAAA website. And up until 2025, it was always 1 drink per day for female sex at birth, and then 2 drinks per day for male sex at birth. 1 drink per day for female sex at birth, not to exceed 7 in a week, no more than 7 in a week. two drinks per day for men's sex at birth, but not to exceed 14 in a week. And so New York State Oasis had adopted and adapted the 1 drink per day for females for also people over 65 because of the age degeneration issues that comes with being an older person. And so, and thinking that that's healthier. So according to NIAAA, right, 1 drink per day is healthy. If the healthiest drinking is no drinking. That's the healthiest. But if the person is gonna drink, informing them the 1 drink per day may not be a bad thing, might be okay, might not affect them in unhealthy ways, is when you have more than 1 drink. And so the perceptions and the habits and the conditioned thinking and the behavioral things that people have grown up with, have seen all around them, over time, might play a part in why somebody wants to have more than 1 drink at one time, especially if you're socializing, and so and this is also another way, and this is also a good reference for why I also talked about the differences, biological differences between a female body with the water and the enzymes and the male body, which tends to have more water and more enzymes, and why there's differences in the drinks. Now, this was conducted, the research was conducted using a binary perspective. One of the things we could do if we have a conversation with someone, say where someone is identifying and doesn't identify as female or male. If I was working with a transgender person, I might be able to offer them the, be very clear, very transparent, and let them know. It says, so I have a recommendation, drinking recommendation guidelines, but I got to tell you that, it was created with a binary perspective, just so I could be, honest and clear with you. I said, but if I could share that with you and you can tell me which one best applies to you, we can work with that. And so there's a way to actually use this limited information more broadly, with different individuals, especially when it comes to gender identity. And this is why I try to go out of my way, and sometimes I even stumble, and I apologize for that, that I'll say, female sex at birth, and because it's more of a biological issue, not the gender identity, which is completely different. And so this was what they went through to 2025. Every 5 years, they used to have this publication, and now I don't see it this year. But if you go to the CDC website, and we know that everything has changed, and I want to be transparent about that too. What they do have, that they have these guidelines as part of moderate drinking. So case of resources, I still say go to NIAAA and work off the research. This is what New York State is working with. Up until we learn different. But right now, it corresponds with what the CDC is saying. So it should be safe for everybody in the country to understand these baselines so we can share that with the community members. You can't go to the liquor store and go to the grocery store and get a bottle of alcohol, get a 6-pack of beer, and then you get this information about appropriate drinking guidelines. That does not happen. It only happens when you share it with them. And then in certain situations, you're also going to consider that maybe, especially from a harm reduction perspective, there's certain conditions, certain medications, some health issues that's happening with folks, maybe with age-related situations or circumstances, then that message of 1 per day might need to be tailored, or 2 per day may need to be tailored. So drinking levels, moderate drinking is that 1 drink per day up to 2 drinks per day for men, 1 drink per day, not to exceed 7, 2 drinks per day, not to exceed 14 in a week. Binge drinking is typically around 2 drinks or more within an hour's time. So that's binge drinking. We have folks that often think that binge drinking is like you work during the week, you go to school during the week, and you only drink on weekends. Well, it's a little bit more than that. I can understand why that might be part of it, but it's a little bit more than that. It's drinking more than your body has an opportunity to metabolize the 1 drink with. And so when the liver is working that hard, it's even though it's not an easy substance to process, but the liver's going to do it. It's going to take about an hour to do it. So give it take a few minutes, right? And then while it's processing 1 drink, and you have 2 and 3, now you're overwhelming the liver. And so, and this is not something that everybody knows. Heavy drinkers, 5 or more drinks on any same occasion on each of 5 or more days in the past 30 days. That's what that's considered like. And low risk for alcohol use disorder. For women, low risk is drinking no more than 3 drinks on any single day. And you know what's is a little frustrating, and I put it here because this comes from the research, is that we used to tell folks, you know, it used to be framed that you can have no more than 3 drinks in a day for female sex at birth, not to exceed 7 in a week. Right now it's being framed, no, have no more than 1 drink a day is the recommended amount, not to exceed 7 in a week. And not all of their information is always aligned, still sticking to the 1 drink per day. Then we make it more realistic when we have a conversation with someone. Let's see what are they drinking? When do they drink? You know, what does it look like? And then provide the information and then work with them through that. So that brings us to the harm reduction piece. And so you folks know a lot about this, but I thought it was really good to just kind of remind ourselves of some of these details that kind of sometimes get lost because we're working with so many other issues with clients or the community. And so I use this in SBIRT, you know, so many people, this is the line of progression of substance use potentially, you know, where somebody has a substance use disorder or an alcohol use disorder. It started at some point where they didn't drink at all. So the experimental use or social use may have pushed on, and they may have gone to binge use and misuse, and some people will inevitably have an alcohol use disorder. I'm sorry, that has substance use. Should have put AUD. There are many people who will not get to the other end of the spectrum. Many people can actually stay in this risky level where the yellow is with the misuse and the binge use. And so we can intervene earlier to be able to help folks make healthier decisions about the consumption, how it affects their health, using the health approach, and the folks who don't ever have to get to an alcohol use disorder. Or some people, I mean, there's no predictors that's going to tell you like what person is going to get to that disorder or not. You know, there are rates, there's statistics that show the higher likelihood of who might get there before others, but it's still somewhat general. The thing is that people are somewhere along the spectrum of use. And so we can consider the dynamics of the situation, whether they're in college, whether they're in high school, whether they have their own business and they're 65 or 70, or maybe they're 40, they have a lot of stresses, they have 4 kids, or they don't have a lot of stresses, or, you know, it's just pushed and pulled with so many different things, so many mitigating issues. So it has to be an individualized conversation. So harm reduction is that philosophy that we're all familiar with that talks about a continuum of change. Instead of like using back in the day, everything was more like an either or, you know, that binary perspective. Human beings have never been an either or type of person, type of creature, you know, very fluid, you know, and so harm reduction looks to work where someone may be at, you know, and so if someone is at a certain amount of consumption, if there are also maybe receptive to having a conversation about it, is if someone if there are certain goals they may have that they want to achieve, it gives us a lot of opportunity to understand where they're at and how we can help them reduce, maybe have conversations that they never thought of. So we acknowledge that small incremental steps are progress and necessary to long-term change. And this is very different from, say, 25, 30 years ago, where treatment used to, like, it was always abstinence-based, and it was an either or, all or nothing type of approach, which is so really unrealistic. I think because we have evolved so much, and so much of that, the continuum has really been integrated in the different disciplines. I think that has been helpful in terms of meeting people where they're at. And so harm reduction uses a whole set of strategies and it does start at abstinence. That is a potential option. It just doesn't have to be the only option. As options, you know, depending on where the person is at, how much they consume, things they could do to reduce the harm by reducing the amount of alcohol that they consume. So we can focus on reducing the negative consequences and the risky behaviors. So it doesn't have any kind of judgment about that. You know, it's an approach that is looking to collaborate with the other individual, you know. So that's where the stages of change can be helpful, especially when we're thinking about, we always think about motivational interviewing as a way of engaging folks. I remember one of my past career moves was in my earlier days, I did HIV prevention. And one of the things we were always tasked to do is to, first of all, understand what the stage transtheoretical model by Prochaska and DiClemente is, which is that people can be in different places regarding, change, and that and how we, how we can identify that person there, and then know what to do when we understand somebody might not be thinking about a potential change with a certain behavior, or maybe they're willing to go forward with a behavior change. It really is helpful to understand that there are such things as pre-contemplative state of mind, which is where someone is not thinking, it's not even on their radar, about changing, by dropping those cigarettes, by stopping, by reducing the alcohol, everything's working famously, and there is no issue to, there's no thought about it. Contemplation is where probably has crossed their mind, and maybe they do think it's something, a behavior to address. Maybe it's not as important right now, and maybe it's not the time to deal with it. Then next goes that preparation, where people are willing to do, are open to doing something, and they put it into action, and eventually they sustain the behavior. And so understanding these stages of change are really helpful for harm reduction. And so it identifies, harm reduction really identifies a range of risk, encourages people to start where they are, not where we as providers want them to be, but where they are. This is especially important for those folks who are prevention specialists who work with folks using this approach. But everybody can do this. So a person, I always stress the person-centered aspect of the work we do, because we want to, for change to be effective and to be sustainable, it needs to come from the individual. There's more information, there's more research that shows that the person participating and identifying their own reasons and their own motivations for why they want to make a change, when they commit to their own change process, there's a higher likelihood that they will have successful outcomes. So the person sets their own realistic targets, their own realistic goals, and they move, and we walk with them and move at their pace. So some strategies, establish a culturally sensitive. I'm sorry. Any comments, any questions? I know I've been going on and on. Oh, hi, Roger. Go ahead, Roger.
Yes, I just like to say, as a service provider, we have to realize that the pre-contemplation and the contemplation stages fluctuate a lot, because clients kind of rotate through those two phases before they actually get into the contemplation stage. They might be saying, oh, well, I'm willing to make a change, and then next week they're back to feeling like, well, no, I'm good right now. I don't really feel like it. Sometimes it takes a couple of attempts for them to actually get into the preparation stages and stuff like that. And sometimes us as service providers, we get frustrated and not really understanding that everybody's process is their own. And we as service providers, we have to meet a person where they're at. And just because I'm standing 5 feet away from you today doesn't necessarily mean that tomorrow I'm not going to be standing 10 feet from you. So every day I have to meet you at a different place, because every day I'm not going to be at the same place that I was the day before.
Thank you. Yeah, that's one of the reasons why the stages of change are important, and using communication skills with an MI spirit is especially important, because you can meet people where they're at. You can actually, as a provider, using those types of person-centered approaches, those communication strategies, help someone go from pre-contemplation, have a conversation with them to raise their awareness about what that risky behavior might be, how it might be impacting them, and they might actually consider doing some changes. So there's options, there's opportunities that you as providers do have. Brendan, I saw your hand up and then you went down. Brendan, did you want to add here? I didn't want to miss your hand.
Yeah, I just wanted to say, like a problem that's particularly about alcohol is a client may be in denial about the behavior relative to
Yeah.
other drugs, because it is legal and can be procured really easily. So meeting with people while they're kind of don't believe they don't have a problem, but some of their behaviors may be creating more problems, can be challenging, but you just gotta keep showing up, and hopefully someday they'll be ready to address it.
So yeah, I totally agree with that. Here's the thing. We can share with folks in a way that doesn't judge them. We can share with folks information. So did you know that, I know that with stressors, when you get stressed, you take a drink. That says, can I give you some information about that? And if they say yes, okay. So, well, what happens with alcohol is that at first it might get somebody to feel relaxed. And then I said, once they get to that second and third drink, it actually stresses the body more. What do you think about that? I can just impart that information to someone, let them kind of ponder it, let them process it, because it's going to be specific to their situation. So there's opportunities in how we can share information, make it tailored to their circumstances. That can prompt when we raise their awareness and we give them information they don't normally have, and we make it that personable where it's about them, that relatable, that can start helping a person think, I said, you know what, that's going to stop me from being available to take my kids to the sport, to the after school sports all the time, or whatever the situation is. There's opportunities. Screening, brief intervention, referral, treatment is one of the ways. SBIRT is one of the ways we can do that. So I hope I see you in one of those. But yeah, I know people are in different places, different times. I totally get that. But there are things we can do. We can do without telling them what to do. We can give information that can help them maybe lean towards the side of maybe doing something healthier. Summer?
So I have a question. Because I don't really work with like alcohol abuse and stuff, because I'm a housing case manager, but I know someone like personally, like a family friend that is struggling with alcohol abuse, and they're not really like, they know that they have a problem, but I guess like they're kind of scared to like really start the process to make that change. And so I wanted to get like some advice from you all, like how to have that conversation to be able to like motivate them to be able to like make the change without like pushing them in a way that's going to like scare them away. Because it's like they know that they have a problem, but it's just like, I think they just don't know where to start to be able to correct the behavior, I guess is what I'm trying to say.
So I know I'm limited on time here, so I'm gonna make a suggestion. You have a lot of providers and experts here. A lot of providers and experts here. One of the things that you can do is ask them, have you ever thought, you seem to be struggling with this. You feel like talking about it? And have you ever thought of maybe, have you ever thought about maybe doing this? Just having those types of questions and if you're comfortable doing that, or have someone who already knows about it to talk to them. But you have a lot of experts here, and the resources in the chat. You folks can give your resources and your contact information so you can help Summer out here. Okay.
Thank you.
Thanks for asking that. Antonio.
Yeah, I was listening, and what came to mind to me was the desire, right? If a person does not lose the desire, then harm reduction, it won't matter at that point, because the desire is what, I not believe in harm reduction because it keeps people long enough and keeps them alive long enough for them to recover. I get that, right? And it also reduces people going to the emergency room or accidents or long-term disease. I understand that. But it also reduces shame and guilt, and it makes people more likely to seek help. And I acknowledge that recovery is a process, it's not an event, but without losing the desire to use, there will always be a resistance to change.
Well, it depends on what the end goal is. I'm not suggesting that everybody wants to stop alcohol drinking. That's not what I'm suggesting. And here in harm reduction, what we're talking about is reducing the harm of consumption, which comes with reducing the consumption or addressing the behavior. And not by telling people what to do, but also about, because I'm thinking of abstinence, which may be part of what you're used to, Antonio, but I'm thinking also about people who are not at a disorder level that might benefit from reducing their consumption, but are not able to connect the risky consumption that they're doing right now to their health issues that they're going through. So it's a way of it's a matter of how you present it, how you make it very tailored to the individual, and raise their awareness, because a lot of times they don't necessarily understand that some of the things that they're doing are having a health impact on them. And so it's really a whole approach. And then, okay, I'm going to take these steps 2 hands, and then I'm going to finish up. So thank you for mentioning that, Antonio. That's the reason why I do the SBIRT, which like we did yesterday. That's the reason why I do a lot of the SBIRT. SBIRT is such a great approach to be able to address, how someone can reduce their consumption and get healthier, and not necessarily have to abstain or need to abstain. Catherine, and then Maria.
Hi there. I work in addiction treatment. I work with people that are court mandated to addiction treatment. I had a client, young mom, DCSF situation, serious alcohol dependency. She would have to drink vodka first thing in the morning to function. This woman didn't think she had an issue. She didn't see anything wrong with her drinking, definitely didn't want to stop. The problem was that her parents wouldn't let her drive her car. The problem was that her job was too stressful. The problem was the DCSF people. It's the cognitive dissonance that has to be addressed before anything can change at all. And especially with alcohol, which is so normalized, it presents this whole other very different challenge than some of the more sort of marginalized, discrete, or stigmatized addictions. It's just easier to get through to someone with a chemical dependency that understands that it's taking a toll on their life, versus the really insidious thing about alcohol, which is that it is so socially acceptable. So I don't know, that's just to say, I guess, there are levels to it beyond simply educating or spreading awareness, where the kind of deeper, more fine-tuned psychological issues are very difficult to address. In the case of that particular client, she stopped engaging with treatment. I have no idea what's going on with her now, unfortunately.
Okay. So she was in treatment. That means she had a disorder. She had a diagnosis.
She has a diagnosis. Okay. She has a disorder. She has serious complications from it. And yet to her, her drinking was never the problem. It's everyone else, right?
Well, so there are different approaches. And I'm saying, if you've never done SBIRT, you should come to one of the trainings and think about SBIRT. And so, because there are things that we can meet people where they're at when there are risky levels, but there's also many different ways of approaching folks, even in treatment with the disorder level. There are effective approaches. We just need to be more informed, and the better we get at it, the better we can, we can connect with folks. And I totally understand when there's like some very heavy psychiatric issues, totally understand that, and so for some folks, the support may need to be comprehensive over a slower and longer period of time. Each person is different. So thank you for mentioning that. Maria?
Yeah, I was just going to add, when we go back to kind of old school thinking, right? Someone won't get treatment until they hit rock bottom. I find that harm reduction and motivational interviewing is a way to bring that bottom up, because what happens is you're not sitting there telling them don't drink. You're sitting there saying, you know what, maybe next time you go out, maybe try having one drink and then a glass of water, or just try to limit it. And after they repeatedly try these things and they find that they're not successful, they connect the dots and they realize there's a bigger problem here going on. And the SBIRT model, I oversee not only counseling, but our health office. I had everybody trained on MI and brought SBIRT to our health center too, because it's really it's the best practice. Practice. So thank you.
Fantastic. So yeah, so you folks work really hard just to evolve what you already know and your skill set and add more, because there is more options. We're broadening our scope. We're not doing an either or, abstinence or alcohol or disorder based. We are doing folks all along those gray areas too, because they would benefit. I'm just gonna give you one more slide. This has been really good. And I did not cover as much as I wanted to, but the conversation was better. So listen, let me just end with this. Reducing harm from alcohol. This depending on the dynamics of the situation and the circumstances, so individual. You know, there are moderation strategies. If people learn how to nurse drinks, people can eat food before they go out to the wedding and maybe think about, you know, having consciously having that one drink over a long period of time. You know, there's so many things that can be done. Help folks count drinks, avoid mixing other substances. Also understand that any of these strategies will work if you acknowledge and recognize, you know, what are the challenges they're currently going through that are associated with their level of consumption, how it links to their use. And you'll be able to tailor this more appropriately for each given person. You know, sometimes somebody who's maybe the designated driver doesn't need to be that person. Maybe the person can think ahead of time and say, you know what, I need, you know, let me go with my friend and let my friend be the designated driver. They can, or, you know, sometimes we get an Uber instead of driving our own car. You know, just even the simplest of options can be a potential opportunity for a community member to consider doing things in a safer way. And nothing has to happen like a light switch overnight. I'm not expecting that. Human beings don't work that way. But the more you stay consistent about addressing or having a conversation, a non-judgmental conversation, person-centered conversation with someone with their level of consumption and what it looks like in their world and where they would like to go, the more you help support that and using those communication skills very strategically, the more likely you can raise their awareness. They can consider the importance of maybe doing something and leaning towards addressing behavior or maybe even reduction. You know, so all of that takes time. I just wanted to give you some tidbits and some information on alcohol that can help remind you some things you already know and some things we could start making sure we continue to or increase our use of in terms of the information of alcohol in somebody's life. So I appreciate there's a lot of dialogue in this web training. I am going towards, yeah, let me see. So I'm going here. Yeah, because I said I was going to keep it longer. So stress reducers. So you're going to have these on your slides. You got Vivitrol here is one of the medication for alcohol use disorders that we use for folks who do have alcohol use disorders. But there's also different issues we can give. You know, there's phone apps. There's some here. Please look at it when you get the slides. And that people can use to remind themselves. And screening brief intervention, I am a diehard believer in this thing. And so this is a process that you might be interested in becoming efficient with, and I can help you with that. You know, this can help you help those folks that might have a hard time thinking that not so much that they have a problem, because I have a problem with saying the word problem. People don't have problems. They might have situations, and maybe that's the first thing we can start to eliminate. But there's a way to approach and bring up the conversation where someone won't feel targeted or judged, where they're more likely to be receptive to a conversation with you. And so these are some resources, and here is the scan to code. Thank you so much, everyone, for being here. My colleague just put the link in the chat box, which is the easiest way to do it.